Chapter 3 The Family Dog. Nobody ever came out right out and said it, but Fudge was the reason my father lost the Juicio account. But I thought about it. My father said he was glad to be rid of Mr. Garby. Now he could spend more time on his other clients, like the Toddle Bite Company. My father was in charge of their new TV commercial. I thought maybe he could use me in it instead, but I know how I know how to stand on my head. But he said he wasn't planning on having any headstanders in the commercial. My grandma taught me to stand on my head when I spent the night at her house. I can stay up for as long as 3 minutes. I showed my mother and father and Fudge how I can do it right in the living room. They were all impressed, especially Fudge. He wanted to do it, so I turned him upside down and tried to teach him how, but he always tumbled over backwards. Right after I had learned how to stand on my head, I heard Fudge stopped eating. He did it suddenly. One day he ate fine, and the next day, "No eat," he told my mother. He didn't pay any attention to him until the third day, when he still refused to eat, and she got upset. "You've got to eat, Fudgy," she said. "You want to grow up to be big and strong, don't you?" "No, grow," Fudge said. That night my mother told my father how worried she was about Fudge. So my father did tricks for him while he and my mother stood over his chair trying to get food into his mouth. But nothing worked. Nothing. Not even juggling oranges. Finally, my mother got the brilliant idea of me standing on my head while she fed Fudge. I wasn't very excited about the standing on my head in the kitchen on the floor. It was awfully hard in there. But my mother begged me. She said, "It's very important for Fudge to eat. Please help us, Peter." So I stood on my head. When Fudge saw me upside down, he clapped his hands and laughed. When he laughs, he opens his mouth, and that's when my mother stuffed some baked potato in it. But the next morning, I had to put my foot down. "I do not want to stand on my head in the kitchen to anywhere else," I added. "And if I hurry up, I'll be late for school." "Don't you care if your brother starves?" "No," I told her. "Peter! That's an awful thing to say." "Oh, he'll eat when he gets hungry. Why don't you just leave him alone?" That afternoon, when I came home from school, I found my brother on the kitchen floor playing with boxes of cereals and raisins and dried apricots. My mother was begging him to eat. "No, no, no!" Bud shouted, making a terrible mess, dumping everything on the floor. "Please stand on your head, Peter," my mother said. "It's the only way I'll get him to eat." "No," I told her. "I'm not going to stand on my head anymore." I went into my room and slammed the door. I played with Dribble until supper time. Nobody had ever worries about me the way they worry about Fudge. If I decided not to eat, they'd probably never even notice. That night during dinner, Fudge hid under the kitchen table. He said, "I'm a doggy, woof, woof, woof." It was hard to eat with him under the table, pulling on my legs. I waited for my father to say something, but he didn't. Finally, my mother jumped up. "I know," she said. "If Fudgy's a doggy, he wants to eat on the floor, right?" If you ask me, Fudge has never even thought about that, but he liked the idea a lot. He barked and nodded his head, so my mommy fixed him a plate and put it under the table. Then she reached down and petted him like he was a real dog. My father said, "Aren't we carrying this a little too far?" My mother didn't answer. Fudge ate 2 bites of his dinner. My mother was satisfied. After a week of having him eat under the table, I felt like we really did have a family dog. I thought how great it would be if we could trade Fudge in for a nice Cocker Spaniel. That would solve all my problems. I'd walk him out, feed him, play with him. He could even sleep on the edge of my bed at night. But of course, that was wishful thinking. My brother is here to stay, and there's nothing I can do about it. Grandma came over with a million ideas about getting Fudge to eat. She tricked him by making milkshakes in the blender when Fudge wasn't looking. She threw in an egg. Then she told him if he drank it up, he would be a big surprise at the bottom of the glass. The first time he believed her and he finished the milkshake, but all he saw was an empty glass. Then there wasn't any surprise. Fudge got so mad, he threw the glass down, smashed into little pieces. After Grandma left. The next day, my mother dragged Fudge to the Dr. Cohn's office. He told her to leave him alone, that Fudge would eat when he got hungry. I reminded my mother that I told her the same thing for free, but I guess my mother didn't believe me either. One of us, because Fudge took to see 3 more doctors. None of them could find a thing wrong with him, my brother. The doctors even suggested that my mother cook Fudge's favorite foods. So that night, my mother broiled lamb chops just for Fudge. The rest of us ate stew. She served him the 2 little lamb chops on his plate under the table. Just the smell of it was enough to make my stomach growl. I thought it was mean of my mother to make them for Fudge and not for me. Fudge looked at the lamb chops in a few minutes. He pushed it away and said, "No, no chops." "Fudgy, you'll starve," my mother cried. "You must eat." "No chops, cornflakes," Fudge said. "Want cornflakes." My mother ran to get the cereal for Fudge. "You can eat chops if you want, Peter," she told me. I reached down and helped myself to the lamb chops, but my mother handed Fudge a bowl of cereal. But he didn't eat it. He sat there at my feet and looked up at me. He watched me eat the lamb chops. "Eat your cereal," my father said. "No, no, eat cereal," Fudge yelled. My father was really mad. His face turned bright red. He said, "Fudge, you will eat that cereal or you will wear it." This was turning out to be fun after all, I thought, after the lamb chops were really tasty. I dipped the bonus of ketchup and chewed away. Fudge messed around with the cereal for a minute. Then he looked up at my father and said, "No eat, no eat, no eat." My father wiped his mouth with his napkin, pushed back the chair, got up from the table. He picked up the bowl of cereal in the bathroom. I went along nibbling on the bone. I wanted to see what was going to happen. My father stood Fudge in the tub and dumped the whole bowl of cereal right over his head. Fudge screamed. He sure can scream loud. My father motioned to me to go back to the kitchen. He joined in a minute. We sat down and finished our dinner. Fudge kept on screaming, and my mother wanted to go get him, but my father told her to stay where she was. He'd had enough of Fudgy's monkey's business today at meal times. I think my mother was really relieved that my father had taken over. For once, my baby brother got what he deserved, and I was glad. The next day, Fudge sat at the table again, in his red little booster seat where he belongs. He ate everything my mother put in front of him. "No more doggy," he told us. And a long time after that, his favorite expression was, "Eat it or wear it."